The call came over the radio at 2:47 p.m. Mayday, Mayday, Flight 447, declaring emergency, hydraulic failure, requesting immediate assistance. Well, in the control tower, they scrambled for their best experts. On the ground, a baggage handler who'd been ignored for a decade heard every word, and he was the only one who knew exactly what needed to be done. Welcome to Stories from Us. Before we begin this powerful story of hidden expertise and life-saving heroism, tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from today? And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button. These moments matter more than you know. James Jim Mitchell had been working the noisy tarmac of Denver International Airport for 10 years, starting every morning at 6 a.m. sharp, pulling on his orange reflective vest and pushing heavy baggage carts between terminals that stretched across the Colorado landscape like metal and glass monuments to human travel. 8 hours a day, hundreds of suitcases, thousands of pounds of cargo, constant movement under the endless sky where jets roared overhead every few minutes, carrying people to destinations he no longer flew to himself. To the thousands of passengers who passed through Denver daily, Jim was invisible, just another airport worker in coveralls loading their belongings into cargo holds, part of the machinery that made their travel possible but not worth a second glance. He moved with quiet efficiency, never drawing attention to himself, never causing delays or problems that might make someone remember his face. Jim was a man in his early 50s, with graying brown hair and weathered hands that spoke of years spent working outdoors in all kinds of weather. His blue eyes held a sharpness that most people never noticed, constantly scanning his environment with the kind of awareness that comes from training most civilians never receive. He kept himself in excellent physical condition despite the manual labor, his posture straight and movements precise in ways that suggested discipline learned somewhere other than an airport training manual. His coworkers respected him because he was reliable, always willing to work overtime, never complained about difficult assignments or harsh weather conditions. But none of them asked about his background, and Jim never volunteered information about the life he'd lived before Denver International. He preferred it that way. Quiet anonymity was easier than explaining why someone with his qualifications was loading luggage for a living. The passengers treated him with the casual indifference or outright rudeness that service workers know well. They complained when their bags were delayed, snapped at him to be more careful with expensive luggage, and spoke about him as if he wasn't there when discussing their important business or vacation plans. Jim never responded to the disrespect, never defended himself, never revealed that he understood more about aviation than most of the people giving him orders. What none of them knew, what none of them had ever bothered to ask, was that James Mitchell had spent 20 years as an Air Force pilot, commanding some of the most sophisticated aircraft ever built. He'd logged over 3,200 flight hours in F-16 Fighting Falcons, completed 127 combat missions over Iraq and Afghanistan, and earned decorations that most career military officers never see. The Distinguished Flying Cross, multiple air medals, 2 Bronze Stars for exceptional service under fire. Jim had joined the Air Force straight out of high school in his small Colorado hometown, drawn by the promise of seeing the world and serving his country in the most challenging way possible. Flying fighters required split-second decision-making, perfect technical knowledge, and the ability to function under pressure that could literally mean the difference between life and death. For 2 decades, he'd mastered skills that few people ever develop, handling emergencies that would paralyze most trained professionals. His specialty had been complex aircraft systems, particularly hydraulic and flight control mechanisms that kept multi-million-dollar jets functioning under extreme conditions. He had dealt with in-flight emergencies that tested every aspect of his training, brought damaged aircraft home when other pilots might have ejected, and served as an instructor, teaching younger pilots how to handle situations that could never be fully simulated in training exercises. But military life had extracted its price in ways that weren't visible from the outside. His wife, Karen, had battled cancer for 3 years while he was deployed overseas, and he'd made the difficult decision to take early retirement to be with her during her final months. They'd never had children, and after Karen's death, the house they'd shared felt too empty, too quiet. filled with memories that made sleep difficult and silence unbearable. The transition to civilian life had been harder than he'd anticipated. Corporate aviation jobs required connections he didn't have, and the idea of flying for airlines felt like a step backward after commanding fighter jets. The airport baggage job had started as temporary work while he figured out his next move, but temporary had stretched into years as he discovered that physical labor and the constant noise of jet engines provided a kind of peace that office work never could. Every day on the tarmac, he watched aircraft taxi, take off, and land with the eye of someone who understood exactly what was happening in the cockpit during each phase of flight. He could identify aircraft types by engine sound alone, automatically calculated wind direction and runway conditions, and noticed maintenance issues that ground crews sometimes missed. Old habits from 20 years of flying never disappeared, even when they were no longer officially needed. That Tuesday had started like every other day for the past decade. Jim was working Terminal B, loading baggage for United Airlines' busy afternoon departure schedule when Flight 447, a Boeing 737 inbound from Chicago with 147 passengers and 5 crew members, began its routine approach to Denver. The aircraft was on schedule, weather conditions were perfect, and there was no reason to expect anything other than another normal landing. At exactly 2:47 p.m., everything changed. Jim was pushing a baggage cart toward gate B23 when he heard the emergency call crackle over the airport radio system that all ground crew monitored for operational updates. Every airport worker was accustomed to routine radio chatter, but this transmission made his blood freeze with recognition born of years in military aviation. Denver Tower, this is United 447. Mayday, mayday! We have complete hydraulic system failure. Both primary and backup systems are non-responsive. Flight controls are severely limited, requesting immediate emergency landing assistance. Jim stopped dead in his tracks. Complete hydraulic failure in a commercial airliner was every pilot's nightmare scenario. Without hydraulic power, the aircraft lost control of rudders, elevators, ailerons, flaps, landing gear, and braking systems. The plane essentially became a barely controllable projectile with 152 people aboard, dependent entirely on engine thrust for directional control. United 447, Denver Tower. Roger your Mayday call. Emergency procedures in effect. Clearing runway 34L for emergency landing. Report your current position and aircraft status. Tower, we're at 15,000 feet, 45 miles southeast of the airport. Aircraft is responding very sluggishly to manual control inputs. We're attempting to maintain level flight using differential engine thrust. Passenger count 147, crew 5, fuel remaining approximately 4,500 pounds. Jim abandoned his baggage cart immediately. He'd dealt with hydraulic failures in F-16s, and while the principles were the same, a fully loaded commercial airliner presented exponentially more complex challenges. The Boeing 737 was a stable platform, but without hydraulic assist, it would require techniques that weren't taught in standard commercial pilot training. He ran toward the terminal building, his mind racing through emergency procedures he hadn't used in years but had practiced thousands of times. There was critical information the control tower needed to know, techniques that could mean the difference between a successful emergency landing and a catastrophic crash. Jim took the elevator to the control tower, where a security guard attempted to stop him at the entrance. "Sir, this is a restricted area. You can't come up here." "I'm a retired Air Force pilot with experience in hydraulic failure emergencies. That aircraft needs help that I can provide. Please wait while I contact my supervisor." Jim didn't wait. He pushed past the guard and entered the control room, where organized chaos filled the air. Controllers were coordinating with emergency services, supervisors were on phones with airline operations, and radar screens showed the troubled aircraft's position as it struggled toward the airport. "Who the hell is this?" shouted the tower chief, looking up from a phone conversation with airport operations. "My name is James Mitchell, retired Air Force, 20 years as a pilot. I have experience with this type of emergency." "Sir, you need to leave immediately. This is an active emergency situation." "I'm talking about United Airlines Flight 232, Sioux City, 1989. Jim said loudly enough to get everyone's attention. DC-10, complete hydraulic failure. Similar situation to what you're dealing with right now. The control room fell silent. Every aviation professional knew about Sioux City. It was one of the most famous emergency landings in aviation history, where a United Airlines crew managed to bring down a crippled DC-10 using only engine power for control. The tower chief studied Jim's face, making a split-second decision based on instinct and desperation. What do you recommend? Jim moved to the radar display, studying the aircraft's position and vector. First, I need to talk to the pilot directly. I need to know if they're using differential thrust for lateral control and what their elevator authority looks like. A radio microphone was handed to him without further discussion. United 447, Denver Tower. This is emergency consultant Jim Mitchell. Do you copy? Tower, this is Captain Rodriguez. We copy. We're trying everything we can think of, but the aircraft is extremely difficult to control. Captain Rodriguez, are you using differential thrust for steering, reducing power on the left engine and increasing on the right to initiate turns? We've tried it, but it's very sensitive. One wrong input and we start an uncontrollable roll. Jim closed his eyes briefly, remembering his own experience with hydraulic failures in fighter aircraft. The physics were the same, but the margin for error was much smaller in a heavy commercial jet loaded with passengers. Rodriguez, listen carefully. I'm going to walk you through a manual approach technique. You'll need to make very small power adjustments. I'm talking about 1 or 2% increments. Are your trim tabs still functioning? Partially, yes. Good. Start by reducing left engine power by 3% and increasing right engine power by the same amount. Do it slowly and smoothly. Several seconds of radio silence followed. Then, Tower, it's working. The aircraft is more stable than it's been since the failure. Everyone in the control room turned to stare at Jim. How did a baggage handler know advanced manual flight control techniques for commercial aircraft? Rodriguez, now we need to prepare for landing approach. You'll need to come in about 20 knots faster than normal approach speed. Don't use flaps, too risky without hydraulic assist. Plan for a no-flap landing on runway 34L. Jim, won't that be too fast? Yes, but it's better than losing control. The runway is long enough to handle the extra speed. The next 20 minutes were the most intense of Jim's post-military career. He coached Captain Rodriguez through every aspect of the emergency approach, providing guidance based on principles learned in military aviation and applied to commercial aircraft systems. The control room listened in amazement as the baggage handler demonstrated expert knowledge of advanced flight dynamics and emergency procedures. United 447, you're cleared for emergency approach runway 34L. Maintain current heading and continue small power adjustments for directional control. Emergency vehicles are in position. Copy, Tower. Beginning final approach. Jim, I want you to know, whatever happens, you've given us our best chance. You're doing great, Captain. Trust your training and the aircraft. On the runway, ambulances, fire trucks, and rescue teams waited in formation. The entire airport held its breath as the crippled 737 approached, flying a profile that looked almost normal from the ground, but required constant minute adjustments from the cockpit crew. 5 miles final. We're slightly high but maintaining control. Perfect, Rodriguez. You can compensate with power reduction as you get closer. How are the controls feeling? Still sluggish, but we're getting the hang of it. Your technique is working. 3 miles final. I can see the runway. Jim, should we try to extend the landing gear? This was the critical decision. Landing gear extension without hydraulic power was possible, but would change the aircraft's aerodynamic profile and might upset the delicate control balance they had achieved. Rodriguez, your call as pilot in command. The book says gear up landing is safer, but you know your aircraft better than I do. We're going to extend gear. These people deserve our best effort at a normal landing. Roger that. I'll be here with you. The Boeing 737 appeared on final approach, noticeably faster than normal, but maintaining good directional control. Jim watched through the control tower windows, his heart racing as he mentally flew every foot of the approach with Captain Rodriguez. 1 mile final, gear down and locked. We're coming in hot but stable. Beautiful work, Rodriguez. Bring her home. The aircraft touched down, hard but controlled, main gear slamming into the runway with more force than normal, but staying straight. Captain Rodriguez immediately applied reverse thrust and wheel brakes, using every available method to slow the heavy jet. United 447, Denver Tower. Outstanding job. You're safely on the runway. Applause erupted in the control room as the aircraft came to a complete stop on the runway, emergency vehicles moving in to ensure everything was secure. Jim slumped back in his chair, feeling the tension drain from his body. "Jim," said the tower chief, "who are you really?" "Retired Air Force pilot, 20 years of service, currently employed as a baggage handler." "Why didn't you tell anyone?" Jim shrugged. "Nobody asked." Flight 447 had been saved. All 152 people aboard were safe, walking away from what could have been a catastrophic crash. Captain Rodriguez met Jim in the control tower an hour later, still wearing his uniform and looking like a man who'd just experienced the longest flight of his career. "Jim, you saved my passengers and crew. You saved my aircraft. How can I ever thank you?" "Just doing what needed to be done. This wasn't baggage handling. You're a real pilot." Jim smiled for the first time in hours. Both jobs are about service. Both matter. The story reached the media within hours. By the next morning, Jim's photo was on the front page of newspapers across the country. Hero baggage handler saves flight. Television crews descended on Denver International, wanting interviews with the man who'd hidden his expertise in plain sight. But Jim didn't change his routine. He arrived at work at 6 a.m. the next day, put on the same orange vest, and began loading the same baggage carts. The only difference was how people saw him. Passengers thanked him, children waved, and fellow workers looked at him with new respect. For Jim, the most important thing was knowing that 152 people had gone home safely to their families, that his years of training and experience had found purpose when it mattered most. James Mitchell never needed wings to be a pilot, never needed a cockpit to fly, and never needed recognition to know his worth. He found meaning in service itself, whether commanding fighter jets in combat zones or loading baggage to keep travelers safe or stepping up in an emergency when lives hung in the balance. Sometimes the most powerful stories aren't about what people do when everyone's watching. They're about what people do every single day when no one notices. The quiet experts who walk among us, carrying knowledge and experience we never think to ask about, ready to serve when the moment demands everything they have to give. So now I ask you, have you ever met someone like James Mitchell? Someone whose humble work concealed extraordinary expertise and the ability to save lives when it mattered most? Share their name in the comments. Tell us how they taught you that heroism comes in many forms, that expertise doesn't always wear the uniform you expect, and that the most important moments often come when we least expect them. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, subscribe to help us honor the quiet experts who deserve to be remembered. We'll see you in the next story. And until then, remember, the next time you see someone doing ordinary work with extraordinary skill and dignity, look a little closer. You might be standing next to a hero.